Hey y'all, welcome back to this week's episode of AMA Friday with Amy Miller, Recruiting in Yoga Pants. So this is a question from a friend. So somebody online that I'm connected to had a really thought-provoking question. They said I could make a video about it, so here we go. I'm not going to name names. You don't need to know. But I really like this question. And I have a lot of different ways to answer it, so that'll be interesting. So let's say you're someone, and this could go either way, okay? We're going to use some extreme examples here to illustrate the point. But let's say you're someone who has historically worked in a large company, let's say a FANG company, and you want to pivot to something smaller, a startup perhaps. How does that work? Is such a thing possible? We know it is. We see this all the time. Is it possible to go back? Maybe I go do this, startup-y thing and I don't like it, or vice versa. Maybe I'm a startup dude and I go, land myself a FANG job and then I'm like, not for me, and I want to go back to a startup. So this is an interesting form of bias that we see in tech. We may see it in other industries. I'm just not as close to it. I maybe haven't seen it as much because I've been in tech for so long now. But this is an interesting bias. The FANG people think that the startup people don't have any, intellectual rigor and don't have, aren't able to operate at the scope and scale of a FANG company or a large company. And the startup folks think that the FANG people can only, the only thing they're capable of is spending 6 months moving a pixel. I have bad news for y'all. You're both wrong. Okay? You're both wrong. Because what we have to understand, and this is what I have learned in all of my decades of recruiting, is that we have to validate our assumptions, actual data. It is not unreasonable to assume that someone who has successfully worked in a FANG company has probably figured out how to maneuver some of the politics and manage to get work done in spite of a million meetings a week. And probably had to work in an environment that had a lot of checks and balances and things, to move that pixel. I'm not disputing that. But there is a risk of assuming that someone in FANG can't be nimble or quick or fail fast. Like, I promise you, that's not true. Conversely, someone coming from a startup, especially if you've successfully shipped something big, like, that's a big deal. Like, don't sleep on those people. Okay, if you're somebody or you're looking at a resume where they did 6 month stints at 5 different startups, may have some questions, but there is some general consensus that, it's a safe bet that this person probably had to accomplish a lot of things with very little. And that is a very good skill set to have. All right, because let me tell you something about FANG. They make a lot of money. They don't always give individual teams any of that money when it comes to budgeting and things. So again, we can make some guesses. We can make some assumptions about what that means, but we absolutely have to go a level deeper and actually understand, what did this person do at this company? What was their scope? What did they deliver? What did they build? How fast did they do something? What were the obstacles they were up against that they had to get over? So these are the important questions that we need to understand, right? Before we go making assumptions and deciding for someone else whether or not that startup life is for them or that big tech life is for them. We need to inspect and ask questions and, I don't know, maybe do something like have an interview, right? Purpose of the interview is to gather data and make a decision. Something to consider. Think about that, would you? All right, so let's say our friend wants to get out of the FANG rat race for a minute and they want to go do something cool and fun and startup-y. And maybe come back later, right? There's nothing wrong with that. I will admit, being, working for a large tech company, there is a level of security. Well, there used to be, not in 2025. But, I ain't mad at those golden handcuffs. Typically, I like seeing my stock continue to vest. I can't complain about that. So I get that there is an appeal and that someone may want to go and experiment or try something new and then potentially come back. So now the question is, how long is too long? How different is too different? Am I too far away from it that I can't come back to it? Or is the path back to what I did previously just not accessible to me anymore? Hard to say. And it's hard to say because, again, of those assumptions and of the rampant, well, I have opinions and I know best because I see the world through my lens of my own experience. Okay, you put on those blue blocker reading glasses and all of a sudden you're making some really unfortunate decisions that you wouldn't make if you were seeing more clearly. I only need these when I read, okay? I got my contacts in. So I'm going to encourage all of you to pause and inspect before you make any decisions. But here's what I want you to be mindful of. If you are the job seeker who is thinking about this change or curious if I can do, number one, you need to understand the problem that your target is trying to solve. Don't care what direction you're going. Going from FANG to startup, going from startup to FANG, I don't care. You're going from finance to marketing, sales to customer service. Don't care. Don't care what that pivot looks like. The most important thing you start with is understanding the problem that the other side is trying to solve. So if I'm a FANG person trying to get into a startup, one of the problems that I'm probably going to be asked to solve is how the heck do we get this off the ground? What are the things we need to think about to make sure that we can actually develop this viable product, service, whatever? How am I making sure that what I'm building today, which needs to be fast, and I'm burning through VC money, and I gotta deliver something. I don't have 6 months to move a pixel. How do I do that? But also without losing sight of the need to scale. Successful startups don't stay startups forever. Go back to the 70s and I guarantee Apple was a startup out of somebody's garage. Right? Every single big tech company that y'all like to make fun of started as a startup. We've all seen the pictures of all these founders' garages. How'd you get there? You had a bunch of really smart people that figured out how to scale and execute at large. That's a good thing for your startup. Vice versa, same thing applies. Go in the other direction. I work for a startup. I really want to, get into big tech. I want to see what that world is like. Maybe I'm seeking that security. Maybe I want to, more consistently save paycheck, whatever. Those are all perfectly acceptable reasons to want to go that direction. Understand the problem they're trying to solve. And here's what's fascinating about big tech that a lot of y'all haters are forgetting. There's a lot of innovation and incubation and startups within big tech. That if you're having the right conversations, you're getting in at the right time, you're talking to the right people, you can now parlay that speed and that agility and that ability to move fast and break things into a potentially new pillar for that big tech company. So, how long is too long? Here's the reality, okay? This is where I'm going to get real straight with you. So this is the second thing I want you to be mindful of. The longer you do a specific thing, the harder it is to get out of that specific thing. I've done this in my career. Many of you have maybe done this in your careers. You get really good at that path, and you're walking that path and you're doing that thing and you're an expert, you're a SME, you're top of the class. Well, now, oh boy, now I'm way over there. How do I get back? That can be tricky. So, the sweet spot, and I hate to put numbers on this, I really do, because there's going to be an exception. There's going to be a million exceptions to this rule. But the sweet spot, I feel like, is long enough to deliver, not so long that you've become embedded. That might be 2 to 3 years. Okay? I feel like you need to be able to get in and stay long enough to have some accomplishments. All right. I'm going to use myself as an example here. I was a little job hoppy in my early career, especially in agency. I chased the money. You have a better commission plan? I'm going. Right. So it was not unusual for me to change jobs every, 2.5, maybe 3 years. When I got into Microsoft, I was there for 5.5 years, the longest I've ever been at any one company until my current job. Here's the thing. I did a lot of things during that tenure. I have a lot of varying accomplishments because I moved around internally and stood up brand new teams that didn't exist before. And then I also did some legacy, old school stuff that was like rinse and repeat recruiting. So I've seen a lot of different flavors of that within the same company. This is the benefit of a large company. Then I pivoted over to Google. I was only there for 1.5 years. So it would be a fair question to say, well, what did you actually get done in 1.5 years? Luckily, I've got a couple things I could talk about. Won't get into all that here. But it's a fair question because it was such a finite period of time and really a smaller period of time than most of the places I've worked. On the other hand, fast forward to now, I've been with my same company for coming up on 6 years in January. You would not be wrong to ask the question of have you painted yourself into a box here? Have you done the same thing for these 6 years? Have you, whatever that looks like, right? So you need to be able to speak to that and answer those questions. And as long as you're able to show significant accomplishments, growth, which is not always vertical. Sometimes growth is horizontal. And you're able to show how those learnings, those accomplishments, that background solves the problem this company is trying to solve, I don't think you have anything to worry about. Now, obviously, as long as the market's okay, as long as we're actually hiring and growing, it's been a rough year, y'all. I get that. But this is one of those things where I'm going to encourage you to experiment. I'm going to encourage you to try, throw your hat in those rings, see if you can land that completely opposite job of what you've been doing. But don't be afraid to pivot back. The same thing that got you out of big tech into startup or vice versa is the same thing that's going to get you back into it if that's something you choose to do in the future. All right, y'all. I hope that helps. I don't know. This was kind of an interesting thought experiment. I had a lot of kind of conflicting thoughts on this, but I wanted to kind of distill it down into a couple of key things. So again, make sure that you understand the problem that's being solved. Make sure you're tying your accomplishments and expertise back to it. And don't be afraid to push back on those archaic, goofy myths. Here's where I'm at with that, okay? Everyone who complains about the other side, it's because they've never been on it. Y'all can talk all the smack you want about insert industry here, as long as you've actually done it. Because if you have not successfully worked in that environment, I'm not particularly interested in your opinion about it. All right, y'all. Hope that helps. Let me know down below if you have questions, comments, words of concern. I read them all. And I will see you next week.